Well, there we have it, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to the Circus of Safety special episode. We've been promising this. We made comment about it on last Friday, and then very sneakily we snuck this out onto the interweb and made it a real thing. Trying to pull all three of us together more than fortnightly was almost a step too far, but we've done it, guys. Des, how are you this morning?
Yeah, good, thanks. Looking forward to the show.
Excellent. Well, great to be back with the band. Andy, yourself, mate, how are you going today?
Good, real good. Shame about the weather, but great.
We're about in the wild land of Aotearoa are you this morning, mate?
Pukekohe, at home. School holidays.
Oh, nice, fantastic. Hey guys, listen, we've come together something slightly different today. We've come together for a special episode. We've had a lot of feedback through personal messages, through the LinkedIn page, and today's special show is on Whakaari White Island and WorkSafe New Zealand. A really interesting topic, possibly our most controversial topic to date, but I don't think that's how it's going to play out, gentlemen. I think it's more about trying to help us and hopefully our listeners come to terms with what's going on. And maybe pose some more questions, and who knows, there might be some follow-up episodes that lead to that. But the one thing that we will remain true to, Des, could you please lead us in with our disclaimer?
Yeah, sure. And look, we normally take a lighthearted approach to this video cast in our disclaimers, but I think it's worth recognising that the subject matter today concerns events in which 22 people lost their lives, 25 were physically injured, and many more continued to suffer trauma. And I think it would be appropriate to anchor this discussion in a sentiment of respect for the victims. What I can say is that the discussion to follow is one of genuine concern and interest from people who do not have all the facts, but are trying to make sense of those events and the response to them, and it should be taken as such.
Oh, thanks, Des.
That's it.
We'll carry on. So, special episode. I guess my first question for you guys, and it might be a little bit, I guess, outlined in the title. It's quite a broad topic, right? The Whakaari White Island tragedy and the current coverage that is in the media regarding WorkSafe New Zealand. And if you're not familiar with that coverage, I'm talking about the number of cases being dismissed in relation to the Whakaari White Island tragedy, the talk about restructuring, the talk about redundancies, etc., at the New Zealand regulator, WorkSafe New Zealand, and also the recent resignation of the WorkSafe New Zealand CEO. Now, I guess my first question to you, Andy, I don't know, for me, mate, it seems like these two conversations, the Whakaari White Island tragedy and the WorkSafe New Zealand media coverage, they seem to be blurring. They seem to be talked about as in one and the same thing. Your thoughts on that statement?
I think you're right there, and I think that there's always going to be a degree of blurriness between these things because of the relationship between the regulator and the activity. So there was a lot of discussion early on about the adventurous activities regulations and discussions that had been had by some of the people involved in this with WorkSafe about whether they were covered by these regulations, whether they weren't. And I think because of the nature of that, there's always going to be a blurred line between the two incidents.
Excellent. No, some fair comments. Des, I mean, your thoughts, do you feel that the conversation out there at the moment is blurred? I guess is probably my first question to you. And then off the back of that question, mate, should they be blurred or are they one and the same thing?
Yes, I think they are blurred to some extent, but I think they're both, what we're seeing is symptoms of a couple of deep underlying problems, which I'm hoping we can get to today. But I think what we're seeing is not the problems, but symptoms of the problems playing out.
Wow, no, some great. Yeah, no, I definitely think that currently the way it's been played out in the media, and I guess we've all got our opinion on the media, good, bad, or otherwise, right? But I think it's definitely being played out in the media to some extent, intentionally or unintentionally. I'm unsure, but the lines do seem to be becoming blurred. The recent resignation of Phil Parks, I guess one. If you were a little, I guess I'm going to use the word naive to everything that's going on in the space, you would possibly assume it had to do with what's going on around the White Island Whakaari tragedy. So I guess that's the problem. I think for me personally, while the lines are being blurred in the media and it's, I haven't quite landed on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think I tend to sort of agree to some extent that um, it's the what's happening at WorkSafe is I guess Whakaari White Island is one uh, probably event that's attributed to what's going on at WorkSafe, and I guess it's the one that the most publicly visible one that we can see. I definitely think the two things are separate but linked. So I don't know if we can have that separate but linked. I don't think they should be spoken about necessarily together. I think the tragedy and the events that unfolded on Whakaari White Island deserve their own attention, and we need to learn and we need to understand and we need to move forward. And I think again, what's going on at WorkSafe New Zealand and where we're at currently with that organisation, I think again deserves its own space and its own time for us to learn and to reflect on. And I think if we merge those two things together, there's a massive opportunity here that we're going to miss something, and it's going to become about something that it's not, and we're going to lose there. So, yeah, those are my thoughts in summary on the topic. And again, listen, to those of you tuning in, firstly, thank you for tuning in. Secondly, feel free, if you post your messages in the LinkedIn chat, we should see those pop up. So feel free to engage and get involved and be part of the conversation that we're currently taking. So, moving on, Des, I'll stick with you, mate. I mean, what are your initial thoughts on the Whakaari White Island tragedy? I mean, you know that we've had a while to think about this now. Any kind of summarising thoughts on the event itself?
Yes, and when it was first made public that WorkSafe were going to pursue prosecutions for issues connected with this disaster, I found that quite unusual. I didn't think that workplace health and safety law was the right law to apply to this situation. And I think that in any other jurisdiction, you would probably have other areas of law applying to this area. For one simple reason, if you wanted to pursue legal action against people like that, you probably want to use the balance of probabilities as your burden of proof rather than beyond reasonable doubt. So therefore, you would be looking for a civil action rather than a criminal action, and therefore you wouldn't use workplace health and safety law. And I just don't think that it's the right application of workplace health and safety law. I don't think WorkSafe was quite the right body to bring prosecutions in this context. But I mean, I'm comparing New Zealand to other jurisdictions with that comment. If I'm just taking New Zealand on its own, I don't think there is any other body that could bring an action, and I think that's a gap in the system.
Yeah, and listen, I guess we've got to. I guess when we consider that question that I posed to you there, Des, we've got to take into account what is happening around the world, right? We can't just be isolated here in little Aotearoa, and we should be looking broader than just here. But then again, yeah, and that also then, like you said, highlights that there's potentially a gap here in New Zealand around dealing with situations such as this. I mean, it's not these sort of things we want to have happen on a regular basis, obviously, but in the event that they do occur, I guess we want to have the right tools to make sure that we get what we need. Andy, your thoughts on the Whakaari White Island event, like in general?
Well, it's a horrific event, of course. I like Des was a little bit surprised that WorkSafe were investigating it. Well, I can see reasons why that might be the case. most of the people that were there, that were present, weren't workers. They were tourists from overseas. And it just didn't necessarily sit right with me to start off with, but it possibly throws up some bigger questions about the suitability of the legislation for activities that effectively are beyond a factory. I've often thought that, our safety legislation works reasonably well in that sort of classic workplace setting. But as we've touched on in the past, that what a workplace is and isn't is sort of evolving all the time. And I'm not quite sure that the way that legislation is worded at the moment lends itself to lots of workplaces that people find themselves in, as opposed to being in a factory or on a construction site.
No, fair point. Interesting how your guys' initial thoughts are around the body that pursued, I guess, action, or pursued to understand what went wrong. I know with my initial thoughts when it rolled out, and this is often, so people who are tuning in or have known me for a little while may not realise that I've actually spent a good portion of my working life, about 17, 18 years in this sort of industry, in this sort of space, in the outdoor education sector, where we are taking people and intentionally placing them in risk's way. Now, whether it's real risk or perceived risk, we're not going to go down that conversation. That's for a whole nother show. But what I've noticed, and again, this is what stood out for me on the event. Putting aside I don't think we need to kind of continually acknowledge the tragedy that this event was, and I think we've all now said that. So, but one thing that stands out for me in any event like this, and it was no different, unfortunately, with this one, is the response. So, like, let's be honest. I'm going to put it out there that when people are involved, things could go wrong. Let's not kid ourselves here, right? We're not robots. Although Andy could be, the amount of facts that he spits out, but for the rest of us mere mortals, when we're involved, things can go wrong, and inevitably things will go wrong, and that, I think we've got to appreciate that we're not fallible in that sense. But where I then, I guess, where I become fascinated and interested in is our response to these tragedies and our response to the event itself. And that's what stood out for me again. I mean, this isn't our first major tragedy. Unfortunately, this isn't our first event where we've had to respond to. And again, what really stood out for me was the response by so many different agencies, and how poor that response was. Again, we often talk, and Andy, I know when we talk about bow tie, we've got the left and we've got the right-hand side of the bow tie, but I don't think we put enough time and effort into actually acknowledging that when people are involved, things could go wrong. And with that in mind, what are we going to do about that when they do go wrong? We tend to live in this fantasy world where we don't believe that anything is going to go wrong. And I think that's poor form on us. And again, the response to this event on the day and following, I thought was incredibly poor, and I think it was disorganised, and clearly nobody. It's almost as if nobody had imagined this event unfolding, and which is quite tragic in itself. So those are my sort of initial thoughts, I guess. Bouncing back to you, Andy, I know as in your working life, you spent a bit of time in this space as well, and we're having a bit of a chat about this off air before we went live. I mean, what's the easiest option, mate? Should we just ban and stop all adventure tourism? I mean, why do we want to take ourselves out of our comfort zone and place ourselves in harm's way? I mean, let's stop it, right?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting point. I think it's one of the reasons that I actually moved to New Zealand.
To stop adventure activities?
Well, no, because they stopped them in my homeland. So in the late 80s, early 90s, I think, when I started my teaching career, there was it was called the Lime Bay disaster. It was basically in a school trip. Loads of kids were out sailing. A squall came through, capsized loads of boats, and quite a few kids drowned. The response for that was basically ban all school trips. That somewhat took away the enjoyment of my job as an outdoor education teacher. So I decided to leave. I came to New Zealand, And all the things that I wasn't allowed to do in the UK, I could then do in New Zealand. So, we could take school groups out to all sorts of crazy, wacky and wonderful places. And, the educational benefit of taking kids out from the classroom is truly, truly staggering. And in my mind, it should be compulsory. But it's difficult to make that tangible because you don't get an exam grade or anything. But the social benefits of doing it are just huge. And if you go the way the UK did, which I think would be a terrible shame, is you end up having to put a value on the educational benefit of it, and that's quite difficult. That's quite difficult to do when you're comparing it when the schools are all graded on their exam results. So there's another pressure on taking kids out of the classroom anyway. And then I guess if you go back to the legislation, I don't really want to paraphrase it, but the primary duty is to eliminate hazards and risks to well-being or life or whatever it is. We can do that by not taking kids out on trips, right? Like if you don't take kids out on a trip, there's no risk. And then if you work down the 5 steps of reasonably practicable, the final one is cost. Now, does that cost refer purely to financial, or can we incorporate the cost to society of kids not being exposed to risk? Because that then it makes it a little bit uneasy for me in terms of the legislation. Can we not take kids kayaking? Yeah, we can. We just don't go kayaking. We watch a video about kayaking instead. But why are we trying to do this? What are we trying to achieve? And what is the cost of us not doing it? It's not a financial cost, but there's a cost to society and there's a cost to those kids' development. And I'm not sure that the current legislation allows for that.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing, and I'm really one of the things I'm looking forward to on this show is we might need a few episodes to cover off the topic of risk, right? Because again, we constantly focus on the negatives of things going wrong. But I know I'm involved heavily with a driver rehabilitation program called Te Ara Tutuki Pai, and have been so for the last 16 years. And there's sort of things we do on that program where we actually genuinely expose people to a real risk because of the consequence of them not understanding, going back out into society and reoffending on the roads. And New Zealand's road toll, again, incredibly tragic. And this program, because we expose these people to real risk, I believe is a huge contributing factor as to why this particular program has an over 80% non-reoffending rate, and definitely something to consider. Des, you mate, should we just ban adventure activities? Just stop it, wrap people up in cotton wool, move on?
I think my short answer is no, but there's all sorts of examples where locations are too dangerous to travel to, and therefore they're closed to the general public. One that comes to mind is Wittenoom in Western Australia, which is shut down due to asbestos contamination. It was a former asbestos mine, and the government basically bought up all the certificates of title, consolidated them into a single certificate of title, and you now enter at your own risk. If you want to go there, you can. No one will stop you, but you're doing so entirely at your own risk. But otherwise, there's no reason to go there. And so that idea of just shutting a place off from general access is not an unusual idea. And maybe an active volcano is something that should be considered. So maybe, do we ban all adventure activities? No, but do we really need to visit an active volcano?
Well, and so that becomes a real interesting dilemma, right? Because one would argue scientifically, potentially, yes, we do need to visit active volcanoes. We need to learn, we need to study them, we need to engage them. But then going back to what Andy mentioned earlier about the fact that in this tragedy, the majority of people that lost their lives weren't actually workers. So therefore, becomes really tricky, doesn't it? Like if we ban visiting active volcanoes, we maintain adventure activities, yippee, out we go. But we put a stop to going to active volcanoes. Where do we draw the line? Is it okay to put scientists at risk and send scientists out to active volcanoes? I guess is an interesting conversation, but we stop tourists going there. And where does that stop? Do we stop flying around them? How big does it become that we're there? But just before we move on, really interesting, and we're going to touch on this topic now, I guess, from Sarah Thomas. And the thing is, MSA said the vessel was seaworthy, and the Adventure Activities Audit said, great, you've got Bosch 1, off you go. The tour companies were audited according to an audit schedule. Volcano was not on the audit schedule. Now, that poses an interesting topic, and those are my, I guess, Des, I'm interested in your thoughts, and I don't know how much you know about them, but really interested in your thoughts around the adventure activity regulations. Are they fit for purpose, in your opinion?
I can't comment on that because I don't know anything about them. It's not something
Right.
I've ever looked at or touched on.
No, and that's great. I think, and that's one of the things that are good to know. And we're not here to pass comment on stuff that we don't know. And I guess it possibly opens up more questions. I mean, Andy, your thoughts on the space around the adventure activity regulations, fit for purpose or not?
Possibly, but it creates a challenge in that people then focus on the regulations without looking at. We've talked about this many times, Brendan, haven't we? If you're in the regulations, then if you're doing an activity that's covered by regulations, then you've got to comply with them. Okay. If you're not, then you don't have to, which is just makes it absurd to me. So when I was working as an outdoor instructor for a school, the legal obligations on me were different from the regulations point of view. The regulations didn't apply to me, but a cave is still a cave. You know, an abseiling wall is still an abseiling wall. But the obligation placed on you is different. And then the whole requirement around auditing and what was it called? Not the qual mark. What's the
Adventure mark? Is it
adventure
outdoors mark?
Outdoors mark. Yep.
Number of different brands.
It was quite a limited. It was quite a limited audit checklist, I believe, around that, and the focus was very much on, in my mind, on equipment, which is necessary, but there's a whole other aspect of engaging with groups of people in the outdoors that it didn't necessarily cover. And one thing that I found quite interesting in terms of qualifications is that my scuba diving qualification counted for a lot more than my outdoor education degree in terms of being allowed to take groups out. Yet I didn't take groups out scuba diving, but taking groups out camping and stuff, the acknowledgement of my scuba diving qual, but none of my other qualifications, which I found very bizarre.
Yeah, again, which again argues the point: are they fit for purpose? And I guess possibly the need for them is there. Possibly, but it sounds like in my mind, in my mind, from what you're saying there, Andy, and please jump in if I've got this wrong. And in my personal opinion as well regarding the adventure activity regulations, I think there's definitely merit in having them there. My worry is was it a knee jerk reaction to a number of tragedies that happened pretty quick fire in this space, and so therefore my wonder is are they, yes, possibly are needed, but I honestly believe the application of them is fundamentally flawed. And the rationale behind that, and this is something we've been talking about quite a bit too, Andy, is with our experience in this space. I mean, I don't know, I can't remember, I've lost count how many years as an outdoor education teacher, yourself and me, 17 years in this industry. I think we've got some credibility to talk to these things where, to be an adventure activity auditor, and I guess that goes back to what Sarah was saying, is very focused, very narrowly focused on participating in the actual activity itself. And in order to be an accredited auditor, and I know I went to go down this road, is that they expect you to have a certain level of outdoor education qualification, which again is in my mind is flawed. Where we and I've noticed this when auditing a number of very specialist businesses in safety. So I refer back to industrial rope access companies, which again, I've had a huge amount of involvement in. I go back to adventure activity companies or any organisation that is incredibly specialist around what they do. They may have the the knowledge and the systems and the processes to deliver and to consider that very narrow field of operation that they're working in. But where it then falls over is looking at the wider context of it, which is what the Act requires us to do, right? The Act requires us to not just consider the specifics of what we're doing, but how that may affect around. And so those are my initial thoughts. But we could probably do a whole topic, Andy, you and I, a special show on adventure activities in the outdoors and the regulations that try to manage them. But we'll move on. Up to you, Andy, again. Actually, no, you know what? I've decided I'm going to change my mind because I can. Because no one's going to stop me. Des, you've been a bit quiet there for a bit. Mate, your thoughts on the White Island prosecutions? I know you touched on a little bit about whether this was the right legislation. Obviously, we're not privy to behind the scenes type stuff. So, I mean, what are your initial thoughts, mate, based with your experience?
Just with that caveat that I don't have access to all the information, and I don't have access to the behind the scenes workings. An unsuccessful prosecution is not a failure. At face value, that's not a failure, because you're still getting clarification on interpretation of the law, and in a sense, justice has still been served if there's not enough evidence for a prosecution to proceed and the case is dismissed. That's because there's not enough evidence to convict someone. That's an outcome of good justice in play, as far as I'm concerned. So there's still value in bringing a prosecution, even if it has no guaranteed success. And I don't think the idea that a prosecution must only be brought if there is a guaranteed degree of success is a little bit misguided, because I don't think you can ever say definitively that you're going to be successful in a prosecution. And I think this is one of the issues that I would really like to discuss today, is why WorkSafe has a KPI that they must bring 80% or more successful prosecutions, when that's a metric they have no control over. That they have influence over it, but that the actual outcome of that is something that they don't ultimately control. And an unsuccessful prosecution is not a bad thing.
Yeah, and those are some fascinating points there, Des, and I really hope we're going to have time to kind of explore those. I mean, the first thing there, I guess, in terms of unsuccessful prosecution not being a bad thing, I guess the hard part here is we're dealing with people's emotions at the same time, right? As you've mentioned, the number of fatalities, but you then magnitude and multiply that by the number of people that were impacted through serious injury, and then all those that were involved on the outer ring, right? I guess for them, not seeing a successful prosecution probably is devastating, right? But then if we take a moment to step back and try to, and it's difficult, but try to remove some of that closeness to it, like you said, what we've learned from this is phenomenal, and we need to make sure that we don't move away from that. And then the next part on your topic, which again, I think we've got this as a topic on the spinning wheel of death, actually, is KPI. And setting KPI, and WorkSafe's KPI around 80% successful prosecutions is almost as ridiculous as saying you will report 10 incidences a month. We don't do that anymore, right? We've moved on from that. Our regulator has a KPI in a very similar vein, which is fascinating. Andy, I mean, your thoughts on the prosecution, and how it went?
One of the interesting things that I've had the good fortune the last few weeks to speak to officers of a number of different businesses, and one of the things.
Sorry, for those uneducated amongst us, can you just give us some idea of what an officer is, mate? Because we're not all experts in the field like you are.
This is a definition I want to hear from Andy as well. This is good. Let's do it.
Right off. So officers are the people that have the obligation of due diligence under the Health and Safety Work Act 2015.
Can you give me some examples of what an officer?
So there will usually be a board member. There might be the chief executive. There's a list in the regulation in the regulations in the Act, but there's also this thing about it's anybody else that has significant influence over the operation of the business, and that's where it gets a bit grey. So I've spoken to these senior people in businesses about it, and I've been meeting them on for different reasons. But the first thing that comes up is this that we're talking about today. And one of the things that I found interesting was there's almost the glint in the eye of some of these people and the delight that they were taking from WorkSafe being apparently made to look a little bit foolish. And that worries me, because that, to me, talks about a much bigger picture, that these people are seeing WorkSafe as the enemy, and almost getting one over them is a good thing. And I think that's something that we really need to address, is that, if you put it in context, if the police lose a case, if this happened to the police, they brought a prosecution for someone that had done something particularly bad in perception, then would you be so delighted that they got off? No matter which way we look at it, a number of people died, and a lot of people have some degree of responsibility for that. And we shouldn't be delighted that it looks like fewer and fewer people are getting held accountable for it. And I think I find that a little bit troubling.
Yeah, and I guess that's the concern that I had when it first came out. Is and again, similar conversations. It almost feels like, not that we as safety professionals want to lord over people and say, "Oh, if you don't do this, then WorkSafe's going to prosecute you." But having that in the background, having that safety net as an organizer, as an industry or a profession, whatever we want to call it, going back to one of our other episodes. I guess, like you said, Andy, it does it. I guess the question probably in a lot of safety professionals' minds is do I now lose the credibility in what I'm saying? Because what I've been saying is we need to be doing this, and I guess officers or business owners and directors are like, well, actually, no, we don't need to be doing this anymore. So I'm really fascinated. It'd be really interesting to see how that then plays out.
I think Des is right. I can't believe you just said that. In that there's value in it, and I think the way that it's being reported is perhaps sending the wrong impression out there. And it's not about you don't have to have anything, or you don't have to do this, or whatever the press is saying about it. There remains duties out there and obligations. And as Des indicated, it's good that we're starting to build an understanding of what this actually looks like, because most of this hasn't been tested that well in court previously.
Yeah, I guess the perception is, though, mate, I guess, and this is my worry, yes, there's duties and yes, there's laws out there, but one would like to think, in a tragedy such as this, where we've lost, so many lives, surely these duties would have kicked in. And I guess my worry is, it's not necessarily whether it's right, wrong, or otherwise, it's the perception that it's creating that actually WorkSafe have no teeth. The duties and the laws actually mean nothing, because if you have an event like this, and the majority of, I guess what I'm looking for the word here, Des, you might want to help me out. The majority of prosecutions or attempted prosecutions are being dismissed. Perceptually, my wonder is, what does that create? Forget about what it actually means legally, because it probably really means nothing. Perceptually, what is it doing to the future of New Zealand's workforce, really?
Well, if I can jump in here, I think it points to, people immediately point to WorkSafe and say, is this organization effective? And maybe there's a case to say that they're not, but I want to, there's two things I really wanted to cover today, and this is one of them. I think WorkSafe is struggling to be effective, but I don't think it's their fault. And if you look at the KPIs and the strategy that they've been assigned, that they haven't come up with themselves, but they've been assigned, it sets them up as a dual personality organization, and sometimes those two personalities are in conflict with each other. So one is to educate and support organizations, the other is to prosecute and regulate. That sometimes they are mutually exclusive goals. And then you've got a list of KPIs such as 80% successful prosecutions. There's another one that they must 65% of people directly engaged by WorkSafe agree that WorkSafe educates. These are very, very problematic KPIs. WorkSafe did not determine those KPIs; they had them determined for them. And if you look at the position description of a board member of WorkSafe, the position description requires them to sign up to those KPIs and enact them to the best of their abilities. So there's no room there to turn around and dispute them or correct them or amend them in any way. So I think WorkSafe in this context is kind of set up to not be effective. The problem isn't WorkSafe at all.
So, well, it looks like we're going down the road of, do I take the red pill or do I take the blue pill here, Des? So then I'm just going to put it out to you then, I guess, in your thoughts, who is responsible? So, because right now it's WorkSafe and the media that are getting slammed. The chief executive, Phil Parkes, had to fall on his own sword, some may argue. Where do we start asking those questions? I mean, we've got a general election coming up shortly. Does it go that high?
Who determines the KPIs for WorkSafe and sets the strategy?
I guess that's the question I'm asking, mate.
MB.
Well, there we go. So, I mean, maybe we should be doing a show on the performance of MB then, and having a conversation about their involvement in this whole thing. Because I mean, I guess they were the driver too behind the eventual activity regulations. And again, I guess that's probably there's probably a misnomer, right? And we get caught up. And again, this is the problem with media, right? We get caught up in this WorkSafe kerfuffle. But like you said, they're just the tool, right? They are the ones that have to implement and roll out what's being pushed out to them. So are we looking at the wrong organisation, and is the media playing it out poorly in that light? So, I mean, Andy, your thoughts on that?
I've never thought that one of the key roles of WorkSafe should be to educate. Inform, yes. Educate, no. And I don't think they do much education. And education is a specific field in itself. They shouldn't be in there. They can inform a way, provide guidance, that sort of stuff. But educate, no.
So then, who would educate though? Because I guess and again, case in point, with the way the prosecutions have played out, I guess if we were honest with ourselves, most safety people who are out there educating, advising, guiding, probably would have put their hand up and said, "Oh, listen, after this Whakaari White Island thing, you watch it. Heads are going to roll. People are going to be prosecuted. People will go to jail." And I mean, I'm probably, I didn't really think about it, to be honest, but I probably would have been in that camp as well if we're thinking about it, based on all the stuff that we thought we knew about how the legislation was, and we're out there educating. So whose role is it to educate them if it's not WorkSafe's?
I think WorkSafe provide information and inform people, but then it should be up to educators to educate. So it should be up to either the Ministry of Education entities, universities, colleges, schools, but also private training establishments.
And I guess I mean, I might be getting a little bit off topic here around, what are they educating on? Are they educating on the information provided by WorkSafe, or are they educating on the interpretation of legislation? And then I guess that goes to what organisation should be educating what. I mean, Des, your thoughts? If it's not WorkSafe that should be educating, who should be?
Subject matter experts in the particular field that you're dealing with. And that could be anyone. That could be a private training organisation. It could be a dedicated educator. It could be just someone who's a specialist in that area with, loads of experience and competence. And
could one not argue then, based on that WorkSafe are subject matter experts in health and safety legislation?
We've gone full cycle.
Oh, but this is what it's about, right? I mean, it's not as simple as people might perceive.
It's my answer would probably be no, because they might be subject matter experts in health and safety legislation, but they're not subject matter experts in the application of health and safety legislation to a specific organisation or to a specific industry.
Fascinating, but it does, it opens up this whole other conversation where when we go back to how we originally started the show and we were talking about the Whakaari White Island tragedy, WorkSafe's performance, and are those two things being blurred in the media, but also realistically, are they linked? I guess we've almost, like Andy said, we've almost come back full circle. One could argue they are linked, but they're not linked. It's it's, I don't know. I'm getting confused. So and I guess this is the difficulty, right? And this is probably one of the, I don't know, for me anyway, one of the driving factors for doing this show is to try to like make sense of all of this craziness. And I think, to be fair, I don't know if we can make sense of all of it, right?
I want to ask a question of you, Brent.
Oh,
You said earlier that when this all first unfolded, you said, "Oh, heads are going to roll. We need justice in this thing." We want to see how the Work Health and Safety Act applies. Are you an advocate for no blame or restorative just culture?
Jeepers, mate.
And
This is awkward. Listen, I'm definitely not an advocate for no blame. I think that's fallacy. I think that's setting things up to fail. I'm definitely not a believer in no blame. What I am a believer in is that following a thorough understanding of what's occurred and how it occurred, if people have done or not done things that they should have or shouldn't have, and there is a case to be held, then I do believe that people should be held to account. Like all of us, right? And I guess it comes back to, that's my summary of it. Really, otherwise we could be here for days if I kept riveting on. But it's definitely, I mean, I'm not saying that heads had to roll, but I guess what I was saying is that was the perception, right? Because when we think back to the health, one of the catalysts for the Health and Safety at Work Act of 2015 kicking off was that tragedy, Pike River, right? Now, one of the things that came out of that is, I remember, it was like a long time ago. No one's getting blamed for this, and no one's being prosecuted for this, and directors can hide behind that, and hence why there's this big whole shenanigans about the law changing, right? And the introduction of officers and the introduction of duty holders, which I'm not saying are a bad thing, but perceptually, and I guess this is what my worry is, forget about what's the reality of life. It's about the perception, really, because the majority of people out there, in fact, a good majority of people out there would be basing their thoughts on perception as opposed to the reality, because people aren't all health and safety experts, aren't all lawyers, and understand the ins and outs of it all. But perceptually, there was this understanding that, well, after Pike River and this new act and this new entity and yada, 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 that should an event like that occur again, shouldn't it, where we lose massive casualties, people will be held to account. And my wonder is because people haven't been held to account, what is going to happen perceptually out there? I mean, I know there's still some cases pending, and there's a decision pending on a recent case, and it's not necessarily all over just yet. But perceptually, as Andy mentioned, talking to officers or business owners and directors, perceptually, what is that doing out there in the scheme of things? Does it say that, well, actually, who gives a rat's about health and safety, because I can do what I want and nothing's going to happen? And unfortunately, I think, though, kind of circling back around to your question, Des, I believe, unfortunately, our maturity in health and safety is a carrot and stick approach at the moment, is what's needed. I'm not going to lie about that. We need a carrot and we need a stick. And unfortunately, right now, in my mind, perceptually, it looks like the stick's broken. So what is that going to do for health and safety in New Zealand? Full stop. I guess is my wonder.
That kind of points to my second point that I was hoping we could cover today, and that is, I think it's the wrong stick. And I touched on that earlier about it being in any other jurisdiction, it would be a different area of law likely that would apply in these sets of circumstances. But unique to New Zealand, as far as I know, you can't sue for personal injury. In other jurisdictions, you can. So I would imagine that a case following a disaster like White Island would be a class action for common law negligence, occupiers liability, and civil liability legislation, in whatever form that took. And the burden of proof would be the balance of probabilities, not beyond reasonable doubt, and you'd probably have a bunch of settlements and a bunch of successful litigation on behalf of the victims and their families. And I think that in some ways, there's a possibility that work health and safety legislation is being used to fill that gap where a person can't sue for personal injury.
Well, that sends us down a whole nother rabbit hole. And I think one of the other topics that we got, and it may come up on the show, Des, is ACC. I mean, is that a contributing factor to the way our legislation has been set up because of that inability to sue for personal injury? So I guess it'd be a fascinating topic. And I don't know if we're going to get to be able to answer those questions on the show, Des, but you do raise some incredibly valid points. I mean, Andy, your thoughts on what Des is saying? Is the stick broken? Is there a stick? Do we need a stick? I don't know. Lots of questions, mate.
I don't know if the stick's necessarily broken or whether it's the right stick. There's all sorts of interesting stuff happening at the moment that I think we'll talk about on an upcoming show around the private prosecutions that people are bringing in the Health and Safety Work Act. I think there's some implications there that are worth exploring further, and we should have some more information around those by the end of October. So I think that would be something that would be really interesting to talk about. But I do think ACC is a contributing factor. If you even look back at Pike River, look at any sort of compensation or recompense that the families of the people that died there got is negligible. Yet in any other jurisdiction, they would have been able to sue for incompetence or whatever, and they would have got money. Well, I mean, that's no replacement for the life, but it's at least acknowledgement of the loss. And that's always been a problem with the ACC approach: is the people that get injured get looked after, but those around them don't, to the same extent that they would in a country where you could bring litigation.
Fascinating. Yeah, I think, I guess just to wrap up the show, because we've been going here now for 47 minutes and probably our longest show to date. And I think we were worried about that today, that we wouldn't have sufficient time to cover this topic and give it justice that it deserves, right? I mean, this is a big topic. I don't know, gentlemen, I think we've covered it pretty well in a high level. No doubt I've taken a few notes as we've headed along. There's going to be a number of other things that possibly end up on the spinning wheel of death, and we'll spin the swad on our other shows, and hopefully we can start delving into some of these other aspects of what we've been talking about in a bit more detail and with a bit more focus as we head into it. So just to wrap up the show, I mean, Des, your final thoughts on the whole situation, the whole thing, and I guess what I'd also be really interested to hear from you, Des, is where to from here?
I feel like we haven't covered it nearly enough as it deserves, and quite frankly, I think we could continue this discussion probably for days and still have plenty to talk about after that. Where to from here is it would be interesting to see WorkSafe, whether there's a reset button gets hit as a result of everything that's happened here. But again, I think the attention that WorkSafe's, or the criticism that WorkSafe's receiving at the moment is misdirected. It's not them. They're the symptom of what's playing out at WorkSafe is a symptom of the problem. It's not the actual problem.
Nice. Great. Very thoughtful, which is nothing short of what I'd expect from you, Des. Thank you. Andy, your final comments on the show and where to from here in your mind?
Yeah, I think Des is indicating that there should be a root cause analysis conducted of this in terms of let's take it back as far as we can. So I think he's absolutely right. I suspect there'll be changes, but the reality is nothing will really change.
Wow, quite pessimistic from...
Realistic.
Realistic versus pessimistic. Wow. Okay, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, I guess I don't. I'm going to be fair here. I don't actually have any further thoughts on it. I don't quite know how to summarise. I probably haven't had enough time to really let it all absorb and to have a well articulated opinion on this whole topic. I do tend to agree with some of the things that you guys have said over the show. I know, Andy, you and I have some differences of opinions around things like climbing trees and people falling out of them and the like, and no doubt that'll be explored in future comments. So I think it's I guess maybe my summary is it's a difficult balancing act. It's an incredibly difficult balancing act, and between protecting people. Allowing people to grow as individuals and to experience life and to live life to its fullest. But then the other, and to manage that, I think it's an incredibly difficult balance to have. I agree, Des. I don't think we've probably had enough. I don't know if there'll ever be enough time, right, to really kind of walk through all the details. But what I'm hoping is, we will be producing our show notes, and we will no doubt go over those. And there's a number of topics which I'm sure will end up on the SWOD, Spinning Wheel of Death for short, for those uneducated new viewers to the show. And I'm really hoping that, and that's, I guess, the purpose of the Spinning Wheel of Death, right, is that it'll land on one of those topics and we can kind of start to explore some of those topics a little bit further. But again, so just to wrap up, guys, it's been great. It's been a bit weird. It's only been a week since we were last together. So thank you all for making the time. Thank you to also everybody that's been dialing in and watching. I really appreciate that. Thank you to the couple of you that have been out there posting some great posts. Sorry we can't answer them all now. We will read through those and we will look to try and reply in the thread via text. So, a big thank you. Des, been a pleasure.
Thanks, Brent. Thanks, Andy.
Andy, nothing but enjoyable. So, till the next time, guys, take care.